Mintila, and I'm joined by my friend Tashwanchu. And today we will be taking you through lesson 02. And basically, I will talk on the part 1, and my friend Tashwanchu will talk on part 2 of lesson 02. So, in the part 1, I will basically talk about the flow control statements. So, in Java, there are three types of flow control statements, namely selection statements, iteration statements, and transfer statements. If I repeat, selection statements, iteration statements, transfer statements. So if I will go in detail one by one. So under selection statements, they're basically subdivided into four different types of statements like if else, else if, and switch. If else, and switch. So talk about if statement. So basically, firstly, I will talk about the syntax of if statement. So the if statement, the syntax of the if statements goes like this: like you have to have if keyword, then followed by a bracket. Inside a bracket, we have to have a condition. But remember that this condition has to be a boolean. So if this condition is true, then the code inside this if statement will be executed. Otherwise, the code inside the if statement won't be executed if the condition is a false. I mean, so here are here are the some notes about the if statements. So first note says that in C language, 0 is false and 1 is true, but these conventions are not allowed in Java. For example, if I do it in a practical, okay. So this is a class test, and this is our main method. So for example, if in C, in Java, the condition accepts true. Inside this if I mean bracket, if I mean this true keyword is accepted. So if you run this code, see, the true state keyword is accepted. Whereas unlike in C, 0 and 1 is not accepted in this bracket. So if I try to run this one, the compiler will throw an error saying that int cannot be converted to boolean. So in this if statement, the condition has to be is a boolean condition. So for example, if we declare integer a equals to 5, so if you want to check whether the integer is greater than or equals to 5, so if you try to run this code, so we have initialized a variable a with the value 5, and we are checking whether the a is equals to 5 or not. So since the a is equals to 5, this condition will return a true boolean expression. So the code inside this if statement will be executed. So the compiler will print a value true. Yeah, the compiler will print a value true. So the next point says this: the curly braces are options, but without curly braces, it is possible to take only one statement that should not be a initialization. So what is it is trying to say is you can ignore this curly braces. But remember that if we remove that curly braces, that means the if statement will take only one line of code. So if we want to have a multiple line of code inside the if statement, then we have to declare this curly braces inside a if statement. So if we have only one line of code, it is optional that whether it will be okay whether we include curly braces or not. But if we have an assignment inside a if condition, that is int, okay, so int b equals to int b equals to 5. So if we have assignment inside the if statement, then we are mandatory to have a curly braces. So if we try to run this code, the compiler will throw an error because we don't have a curly braces, because inside the if statement we have a initialization. So if we try to run a code, so variable declaration not allowed here. So in if you want to have a variable declaration inside if statement, it is necessary to have a curly braces. So if we try to put a curly braces, then and if you run this code, now this will work perfectly fine. Okay, the third point says that in Java, semicolon is empty statement. So for example, if we don't have any statement inside a if statement, if we put and we can put this semicolon, then compiler will understand that the if statement is an empty statement if you put a semicolon after a if condition. Yeah, this will work. So these are the points in if statement. So the next one is else if statement. So in else if statement, uh, one point that you should remember is in if you want to use else if statement, it is mandatory to have a if condition before else if, but it is optional whether you have else after else if. So for instance, I have declared a variable a with the value 5. So if I want to check, so if we directly type else if, the compiler will throw an error. The compiler will expect a if condition before else if. So we are mandatory to have if to use if statement to use else if. So this code will work fine. Yeah. So the like if you have any questions, so you can always interrupt in between. So this is the the syntax of else if condition. Now the third one is about the switch statement. I find that switch statement is very much interesting. So you will find in my later video. So the syntax of the switch statement is we have to have a switch keyword followed by a bracket, and inside bracket you have to pass an argument. You have a switch keyword here, and inside the bracket you have to pass an argument. So inside the switch block you have a cases, different cases, case 1, case 2, and you have a default. This is the general syntax of a switch statement. So there are different like cases. So if I explain one by one, inside the switch, it is possible to declare more than one case, but it is, excuse me, okay, inside switch statement, it is possible to declare more than one case, but it is possible to declare only one default. So what it is trying to say is, inside switch statement, inside switch statement, you are passing an argument a, argument a, inside switch statement you can have multiple cases. For example, cases okay, 5, case 6, case 7, and lastly you have a default. So the point number one says that inside a switch statement you can have a multiple cases, but you can have only one default case. So you cannot have multiple default cases. For example, you cannot have something like this, default default. You cannot have this like this. So okay, so the second point says that float, double, long is not allowed as a switch argument because these are having too large values. So for example, if this int is a double, if you are trying to like send this switch argument uh, as a double, then the compiler will not accept this double in the switch argument. So the compiler will throw an exception. See, incompatible types, possible logic conversion from double to int. So usually the switch arguments will not accept double, long, and float. Remember this one. The switch argument will not accept double, long, and float arguments, data types, I mean. Okay, so the fall through in switch. One of the interesting thing about switch is a fall through in switch. What does it mean? So if I explain about fall through in switch, for example, you are having an you're declaring an int variable a with a value 5, and you're trying to check which cases is equivalent to the variable a. So I have declared case 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so if I try to so if I explain about the flow through, I mean flow through in switch, for example, like you are sending argument a. So argument a will be checked with all the cases inside the switch. So argument a will be checked against a first case 5. So it is equivalent to the argument that you have passed. So this code will be printed in the console. So usually if you don't specify break inside a switch, then the other remaining like cases will be printed by a compiler. For example, if you don't specify a break statement inside cases, so compiler will print all the following I mean the cases including the default. So if you try to run this code, yes, see, so case 5 is being like is equivalent to the argument that we have passed. So this is being printed, and all the following cases are being printed. For example, if prior to this case 5, if we add another case 4, this case 4 will not be printed because this case is not equivalent to this argument that we have passed. So only the cases that is equivalent and the following will be printed. So see, this case 4 will not be printed. only the cases that has an equivalent value, and the following cases and the default will be printed. So inside the switch, the default is optional. So what it's trying to say is, inside the switch statement, the default is an optional. You can either have a default value or you can ignore this default. So if you try to run this one, this will work. So you can either have a default or you can ignore the default case in a switch statement. Okay, so inside the switch, the cases are optional. Again, you can either have a cases or you can ignore the cases. You can have zero cases also. So this will again work. So this is working, right? Now the point says that inside the switch, both cases and default are optional. So you can either like ignore both the cases, cases or default. You can leave the switch statement blank and it will work. So in switch, it is possible to declare the default at the starting or middle or end of the switch. It's pretty simple. So you can have default value at the beginning or in the middle or the end, wherever you feel like to place your default cases. For example, if I place in the beginning, then this code will work. Okay, let's see now. Default. Okay, duplicate. Okay, I didn't save, sorry. Okay, I have duplicate. So the another point is here, you cannot have multiple default cases. So if I try to erase this one, then it will work. Yeah, it will work. So this point says that inside the switch, the case level must be unique. If you are declaring duplicate case level, the compiler will write this compilation error. So all cases you cannot have the same cases level. So I try to explain here in the code. So you cannot have like 5, I mean 4 and 4. You cannot have same cases level. You cannot have cases level. So if you try to run this code, the compiler will throw an error. Case level. You cannot have same case level name. It has to be unique. So the last point is that inside the switch for the case level and the switch argument, it's possible to provide expression. The inside switch, you can like as a in argument, you can even like pass an expression. You can say a times 10, and you can even like so this case will print it, right? You can pass argument as an expression. The last point says yes, you can pass this as argument as an expression, and you can even like define your cases and argument, and this will work. So this is about the statement. First, we learned about if statement, then as if, then switch statements. Statements. Now we'll go into iteration statements. When do we use statements? For example, if we have some tasks to be repeatedly printed or to be repeatedly executed, we use iteration statements. Under iteration statements, we have three types of. First one is for loop, second one is while loop, and third one is do while loop. For loop, while loop, and do while loop. So under for loop, before I go into practical, I will just try to explain you the flow of execution of a for loop. Inside for we have initialization, a condition, an increment or adjoint. We have initialization, then followed by a semicolon, condition, semicolon, increment, and a decrement, and we have a body of a for loop. So for for loop, we have also a point. In for loop, initialization part is optional, but semicolon is mandatory. So what it's trying to say is, okay, for okay, first point is that you can either ignore initialization part, but you have to have a semicolon, and then is in tan a plus plus. So the first point is that you can either like ignore the initialization part, but semicolon is mandatory. So this code will work. So this code will work. The second point says that initialization part is not possible to declare the data type two times, whether it is same type or different types. But it is possible to declare the single data type with more than one variable. If I repeat, initialization part, it is not possible to declare the data types two times, whether it is declare the single data type with more than one variable. So what I need to see is, so inside this initialization part, so you can either you can declare same data types two times. For example, int a 5, int j equals to 10. You cannot declare this way. The compiler will throw an exception. So compiler will throw an exception. But you can declare a variable. You can declare a data type with more than one variable. For example, I'm declaring a data type of int and with variable equals to 1, b equals to
YouTube
10. This will work. Okay. Okay. So this will work. So it says that you can have one data type, but you can declare one data type, but you can declare more than one variable. So a equals to int data of a equals to int, data type of b is also int. So you can declare data type with more than one variable. Now the third point is that inside for loop conditional part is optional. If we are not providing condition at the time of compilation, compiler will generate true constant. So so if we are not giving this condition part and we are leaving it as a blank, so during the compilation the compiler will understand that okay guys, after 5 minutes, seems like we have some network issue, so we'll fix and we'll come back after 5 minutes. Thank you. Sorry guys, seems like we are having some network issue, so now we will resume our lesson. So screen share. Okay, so I will continue from iteration statement. So basically under iteration statement, there are three types of iteration statements in Java. First one is for loop, while loop, and do while. For loop, while loop, and do while loop. So I will go in detail one by one. Okay, so first one is for loop. So if I talk about the flow of execution of the for loop, first we have to initialization, then second we have a condition, then third we have a decrement or a increment.